problems with the 737 MAX began with the crash of Lion Air Flight 610 in Indonesia. That was on October 29 last year. That killed 189 people. And a former Boeing senior manager told Congress at that point that he tried to warn top Boeing officials the plane was dangerous.
After the crash, I wrote a letter directly to Boeing's chairman, president, and CEO, Dennis Muilenburg. Mr. Muilenburg asked his general counsel to communicate with me, and we spoke on 3 occasions where I renewed my warnings. I stressed that investigating the factory and talking with frontline employees was urgent, as I was very concerned that this might not be an isolated incident.
Well, we're going to talk to that whistleblower's lawyer now. Eric Havian is in San Francisco joining us now. Eric, can I first get your reaction to the breaking news we've been reporting here on CNN that Boeing is to temporarily suspend the production of a 737 MAX?
Well, we don't have any specific reaction to that other than the fact that our position has always been that the planes should not fly until there was a thorough investigation of the production conditions that our client identified at the factory. So it's up to Boeing to decide how they want to manage that, but we simply were asking the U.S. regulators not to allow these 737 MAX aircraft to fly until that inspection had happened. So it's not just the software. Our client came forward with information about hardware at the plant. And by the way, your clip indicated something that he after the first crash, he went to the CEO. But before the first crash, he wrote an email to the general manager and then met in person with the general manager 4 months before that first crash and told them they had to shut down the factory. They refused to do it.
And what was the reaction from the general manager, Eric, to that?
Well, when Mr. Pierson said, you know, I was in the military for 30 years, and in the military, we shut down operations for far less dangerous situations than we have here, the response he got from the general manager was, well, the military is not a profit-making enterprise.
Based on what your client has said about the production and the way the 737 was made, are you confident, is your client confident that there can just be a fix? You know, Richard Quest was just describing that they're going to go in, they're going to look at the software, the MCAS software of the 737. They're going to look at a few other things.
Train the pilots.
Train the pilots. You know, all those things that were flagged after the crashes. Are you and your client confident that this plane can actually be fixed?
Well, we're not saying the plane can't be fixed, and we're also not commenting on the software changes that you just mentioned. But what he is saying is, look, both of these crashes had a failure of hardware that initiated the crash sequence. It was not, the failure of software happened after the hardware failed. So the hardware points to an issue in the production facility. And in addition, there were other indications that the production facility had issues. Our client saw and reported on all the factory metrics that were plunging in this time period. And in addition, there were 13 other safety incidents reported for this MAX aircraft. So that means a total of 1 out of every 25 MAX aircraft in less than a 2-year period were experiencing a safety incident. And some of those safety incidents that didn't involve crashes were serious ones. For instance, a plane had to make an emergency landing in Iran because of an engine problem. So we're saying that with all this smoke indicating potential hardware problems, there should be a thorough investigation of conditions at the production facility and before these planes are allowed to fly again.
Okay, Eric, why wasn't those concerns that were put out, that were written by email, that were talked face-to-face with managers, why were they ignored?
Well, it's hard to know, because not only were they ignored by Boeing, but then Mr. Pierson went to the NTSB, he went to the FAA. No one would even talk to him. We had to beg the NTSB to give him a 15-minute interview, which dragged on to over an hour because we were spending a lot of time trying to persuade them that they should investigate production. But they wouldn't. It wasn't until the European regulators in September raised issues about these sensors, this hardware that had failed and initiated the crashes. And they said, look, the European regulators said, there's no adequate explanation still about why these things failed. And that's what our client has been saying now for a year and a half. And it's inexplicable why nobody would listen.
Do you
Until
feel you're now
Congress did.
being heard?
Yes, well, Congress finally, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, called the FAA to testify, and then they grilled the FAA administrator about why they had ignored Mr. Pierson's warnings and requests to meet with them and to provide documentation. We gave binders of documentation to them, but I'm not sure whether they didn't read them, didn't understand them, didn't care about them, or what. So Congress has finally ordered them to come back within 60 days after they've performed an adequate investigation of the production conditions that caused the hardware failures and potentially other failures on these airplanes.
Eric Havian, I appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Thanks very much for joining us, sir.
Thank you very much.